putting a new tagline at the bottom of all my emails. It says, "Be bold and be brave." And Dr. Trent Austin taught me what that was all about, because I was working at a large corporation with our wellness program and fighting an on-site clinic manager by the name of Quad Med. And I needed to find a doctor to help the people, because Quad Med was literally getting the docs were literally getting bonused for prescribing statin drugs and blood pressure medicines and things of that nature. And so, like our program, we were taking them off those drugs, and we were literally cutting their pay. And the story goes, I made a call into AccuDoc, and Dr. Austin never picks up his phone, but by some miracle, he picked up my phone call. And then he came and we worked side by side at this company, a Fortune 1000 company, and really kicked it well. And we solved a lot of issues. And, you know, Dr. Carter was involved too. And we really enlightened a lot of people's minds, but it was tough. And then the reason why Dr. Austin stands out is that most doctors are bought and paid for by the local medical groups, like the hospitals, and he's an independent. And so Dr. Austin is formally trained as an internist, internal medicine. Now he runs 3 urgent care centers in Ohio and in Indiana. But his passion is natural medicine, and he also runs a natural medicine practice. And that natural medicine practice really focuses on the major chronic diseases: Alzheimer's, diabetes, autoimmune conditions, things of that nature. And he uses his special concoctions of various medicinals as part of his process of helping people heal and get over their conditions and get off medications. And so with that, I've spent some time with Dr. Austin side by side in the clinic, but I've also spent some time with Dr. Austin out in the field. And I'll claim complete ignorance of fungi. But that's why we have an expert like Dr. Trent Austin. And with that, Dr. Austin, fire away.
Well, thanks for having me, Tom. And I appreciate this opportunity. And also, I appreciate the opportunity to work with you on that little project. And you're doing something right if you're persecuted for what you're doing. And we were doing something right. So, and I learned a lot from that. So that was fantastic. So, my passion, I was trained in traditional internal medicine, where you were taught to prescribe drugs and treat certain diseases. And I'm not opposed to prescription drugs. But when I was in medical school, I had one of the professors say, look, don't ever prescribe a drug until it's been on the market for 10 years, because 1/3 of these are withdrawn for very serious complications and black box warnings. And you really don't want to be using these newer prescription drugs unless there's no other choice, because the data is just not there. And I saw my parents who, as they became older, the doctors would put them on a drug, and then they get a side effect from that drug, and they'd be on another drug. And you could just see these older people just shrivel up and not do well with a lot of these prescription drugs. So I tried to look for alternatives, and eventually, at some point, I got hypertension myself, and I started prescription drugs. And I thought, I don't want to go down this road, and it led me to look for other options, and for myself, and then for my patients when I saw the benefits of these things. But one of the options I've looked at is the medicinal mushrooms, and I really got into the mushroom hunting when I was about 6 years old. So I was about as old as my daughter here. Can you see that slide? Okay.
We only see the first slide of you and your natural medicine medicinal.
Oh, okay. All right. Well,
there we go. There she is.
All right. So there's a little delay there. Okay. So these are morels, and these are what a lot of people start out with mushroom hunting because they're easy to identify. But for me, going out with my parents when I was a child in the woods, in the forest, and the sun was shining through the trees, and it was springtime, the birds were singing. It's just a magical experience, and it's something that I'll always remember and thank my parents for sharing with me, and I try to share with my with my children. The medicinal mushrooms are profound in their unique ability to offer anti-cancer properties and immunomodulating properties. So a lot of our diseases at their root cause are an immune system dysfunction. So a lot of skin diseases are not really a skin disease, they're an immune system dysfunction. And there are prescription drugs like the monoclonal antibodies and some of these more dangerous biologics that are designed to alter the immune system, but they have a host of horrible side effects. The medicinal mushrooms allow us to tap into these immunomodulating properties to alter the immune system in a beneficial way. And in many cases, we can achieve results with very minimal side effects. And each mushroom has a different effect on the immune system. So it alters the cytokines and has various effects that are very complex. One of the questions that come up are, how do mushrooms taste? And all my patients really like the taste of mushrooms, but I've had 2 patients who just really didn't like the taste of mushrooms, and I have their testimony here. They these are, of course, some of the younger patients, but these some of the medicinal mushrooms can be good tasting and delicious, and some are not so good. The oyster mushrooms are something that I have been, that was how I got started in medicinal mushrooms. That was what I used to get off my blood pressure medications. And they have a broad range of immunomodulating properties. So there was a study done in humans that looked at diabetic males who had blood pressure issues. And they used 3 grams of oyster mushrooms, and these patients within a short period of time dropped their blood pressure by 18 points systolic on average, which is a profound drop in blood pressure, and that's comparable and even exceeds some of the prescription blood pressure medications. And this is, I've been able to replicate this across other patients. And it doesn't apply just to diabetic males. It applies to a lot of my patient population, which are people who are overweight, they're obese, or if they have pre-diabetes, if they have metabolic syndrome, any of those conditions, the oyster mushrooms often will help blood pressure. They also have a beneficial effect on blood glucose control for people who are diabetics. They have a little bit of effect on cholesterol, and they are immunomodulators. So they can markedly improve eczema, allergies. They have some effect on asthma. So that triad of eczema, seasonal allergies, and asthma is called atopy, and eczema is also called atopic dermatitis. And it's manifested with elevated serum IgE, elevated serum eosinophil level, and the oyster mushrooms will lower those levels and result in a clinical improvement in these conditions. I had a patient who had a very rare condition called eosinophilic vasculitis of Church-Strauss, which I had only read about when I was studying for my boards in internal medicine. And he'd seen all the king's horses, all the king's men, all the specialists, and nobody could help him. And these people don't live very long, but they get these blotchy purple skin lesions. They have asthma that's out of control. They have kidney damage. They feel very fatigued. It's just a terrible disease. And just out of, so what are you going to do for these people? So, and there's no known, cure. That you can experiment with the different monoclonal antibodies and that aren't really, many of them not safe. So, this is how I approach medicine, is I practice medicine. So we've got, we've got a problem that needs to be dealt with, and let's not do nothing and let's not harm the patient. Let's try something. So we know that oyster mushrooms can lower eosinophils, and I've learned that from studying the studies on the oyster mushrooms. So we put them on oyster mushrooms and reishi mushroom, which we'll talk about later. And I checked his vitamin D level, which was 9. So we worked on improving that. And he has never had another flare-up of skin lesions from this condition. So he's been about 3 years now in remission from this condition, and his eosinophil levels, which I think were like 6,000 or something, came down to about 3,000, then 2,500, and finally down to normal, and have stayed normal ever since starting therapy. So he's been thrilled with his progress. But this shows the power of the immunomodulation, and also the power of not being afraid to think outside the box. You can sometimes achieve, some pretty fantastic results by trying things and practicing medicine and not being afraid to practice medicine. Here's an example of oyster mushrooms in the wild. So the ones on the left are summer oysters, and then the ones on the right are the fall oyster mushrooms. So these actually are a little bit different species, but they have very similar medicinal effects. Wine caps are a type of mushroom that's called the garden giant. So they actually are pretty delicious. They are often found in gardens, and they have the benefit of a lot of people will, if you have a garden and you cover the garden in wood chips, you can inoculate the wood chips with garden giant or wine cap mushrooms, and they have a triple benefit. First of all, they produce an edible mushroom. They will break down the wood chips and help nourish the soil, and provide some fungus in the soil that can help the growth of certain plants. They have they're burgundy in color, and they're mostly for an edible mushroom. They have a little bit of benefit on diabetes, like a lot of the mushrooms have. So there's a question, can mushrooms promote hair growth? And, again, I did an experiment on a patient, and we found the results, and, a few little side effects, but he did grow some hair. So you can see that on the slide. Red reishi is one of my favorite mushrooms for medicinal use. And so this is not really considered an edible mushroom. It's got a long history of use in traditional Chinese medicine. So it's been around about 1,000 years in terms of its medicinal use. It's called the mushroom of immortality in China. Not without reason. There were studies in mice where they gave mice reishi mushroom, and the mice that got the reishi lived 9% longer than the other mice. So it has the potential to extend lifespan. There's another study in mice where they fed the mice a high inflammatory diet, and these mice gained weight, and their gut became inflamed. And then they gave one group of mice the reishi mushroom, and that group had lower levels of gut inflammation, and it altered the gut microflora in a beneficial way. And this led me to the conclusion that this might be potentially beneficial for irritable bowel syndrome. So I had one of my staff members ask me, what do you have for irritable bowel syndrome? So in my style of practicing medicine, I said, well, let's try the reishi mushroom based on the mouse study. And she came back a month or two later and said, this is the greatest stuff ever for irritable bowel syndrome. My cramping, my bloating has resolved. And I don't recall if she was having diarrhea or constipation, but that her bowel patterns had normalized. And a lot of people have there's an overlap of irritable bowel syndrome and fibromyalgia, and the reishi mushroom also works for fibromyalgia, and we don't know the mechanism, but this was actually studied, and reishi mushroom is shown in the human studies to improve physical exercise tolerance in women with fibromyalgia. So it's a wonderful treatment, because these are conditions that, there's prescription drugs approved for these, but they don't really work very well, and they have their set of side effects. Reishi mushroom is very well tolerated. It's great for a wide range of autoimmune disorders. So if somebody has an autoimmune disorder, I put them on reishi mushroom, and we give it a couple months and see if we achieve some benefit. There's benefits for rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, and in many cases, it's not always a cure, but it can improve the condition often. So there's red reishi. There's also white reishi, also called Ganoderma applanatum or artist conch. It has similar properties that have not been as well studied, and it can become very large, but it grows prolifically in my area, which is Indiana. And red reishi can be found also along with oyster mushrooms. Artist conch is interesting because when the fungus is fresh, you can just lightly touch the spore surface of it, and you can produce beautiful artistic drawings. I can't. I'm not an artist. I have other skills, but that being an artist is not one of those. There's other mushrooms that I don't use as often in practice, but they're just interesting from their medicinal and edible properties. One is called chicken of the woods, or sulfur shelf mushroom is the common name. You can see it sometimes in the spring and fall, growing on the sides of trees, quite brilliant. If you get it while it's young, it's a delicious edible, has a broad range of medicinal properties. It helps with diabetes, brain health, hormonal health, has anti-cancer properties. It has compounds that help fight dental plaque. It's got antiviral properties and anti-inflammatory properties. Another one of my favorite mushrooms is turkey tail mushroom. This grows on the side of trees, and if you catch it while it's young, it has a pretty long life, but if you can take these and dry them and make a tea from them, that is a immunomodulating tea that also produces a general feeling of well-being, which is a nice thing to have. But it's an immunomodulator. It has anti-influenza properties, anti-cancer. It helps with some of the blood-borne tumors, the blood-borne cancers, leukemia, lymphoma, multiple myeloma. There's studies showing some potential benefit there. And there was actually a big human trial in women with breast cancer. And they gave some of the women who were undergoing standard treatment for breast cancer an extract from turkey tail mushroom, and it had very beneficial effects in terms of lessening the harmful effects from chemo and radiation and improving overall survival from the breast cancer. Another interest, of mine and also Dr. Lewis is neurodegenerative disease, and these can include things like multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, ALS, Parkinson's. There is a mushroom, it goes by the common name fire sponge mushroom, willow bracket mushroom, and it's got a long history of medicinal use in Asia, where it's been used for anti-rheumatic properties and gastric cancers. But there's some, it also has anti-flu properties. It's very safe. But it's a neuroprotective, and there was an interesting study on the mouse model of multiple sclerosis. So in this mouse model of multiple sclerosis, they would inject the mice with certain toxins, which were a lot like our vaccine adjuvants, and the mice would develop a multiple sclerosis-like syndrome. And in this study, half the mice prior to the administration of the vaccine that induced the multiple sclerosis-like syndrome, they were pre-treated with a water extract of the fire sponge mushroom after further purification. And that treatment group had very minimal symptoms from the multiple sclerosis. And that's what this graph is showing, is that the mice that were untreated all developed very severe symptoms. The others did not. Another interesting mushroom that can be used potentially for neurodegenerative conditions is lion's mane mushroom. So this has a nerve growth factor stimulant that can help repair damaged nerves, and helps. There are studies in vitro showing it helps promote myelin production and nerve regeneration. And they did a mouse study or a rat study where they did a nerve crush injury. So and these mice, of course, would develop paralysis in the leg, and then half the mice received a lion's mane product, and those mice regained nerve function faster and more completely than the mice that were untreated. There was a human study in Japan in nursing home patients with cognitive impairment, mild cognitive impairment, And the ones who took an oral lion's mane powder showed a gradual and steady improvement in their cognition scores, which pretty rapidly went back to baseline within 4 weeks after they stopped the lion's mane mushroom extract. Going back to the lion's mane mushroom, has potential for things to treat things like Parkinson's disease, and there's different nerve growth factor stimulants in the fruiting body versus the mycelium, and I've seen some patients who, if they stuck with taking the lion's mane extract in a raw form, had an improvement, as testified by their family members, in their facial expression, their arm swinging, their tremor, and other Parkinson's symptoms. All right, brown wood ear fungus is another fungus that you can find in the woods, and this is the ingredient in Chinese hot sour soup. So you'll see this kind of brown thing that's a strip. They cut it in strips and they put it in the hot sour soup, and it's kind of got a little crunch to it. So it's an interesting mushroom that also has medicinal properties, and it's quite delicious. In Asia, they are very much more open to the use of medicinal mushrooms for treating illness than we have been here in the West. White jelly fungus is also called cloud fungus or snow mushroom. Has a long history of use in China for skin health, anti-cancer, heart disease. They make a dessert with it. They boil it with sugar to make a dessert. I tried it once. I didn't quite get the recipe right, but it's widely used in Asia. Another mushroom that's very interesting is maitake, or hen of the woods. You find these in the wild. They can be, the mass of them can be 70 pounds or so. So you can get a whole year's supply. You can dry them and use them later. But they have profound anti-cancer properties and antiviral properties. The cancer properties are specific to renal cell carcinoma in particular. So there's a specific fraction, it's called the D fraction of the maitake, that there was a study on that showed pretty profound anti-cancer properties against renal cell carcinoma or kidney cancer. Another mushroom that is widely consumed is called inaki. And on the picture on the right, if you can see, that is the cultivated version, which is a long stem, and it's white, and it's grown in high CO2, low light conditions. But in the wild, the morphology is completely different. So these are mushrooms that they did a study in Japan, I believe it was, where they looked at the mushroom farmers, their family, and the workers on these, where they cultivated the inaki mushroom. They had half the cancer rate as the general population. So again, some of these, and can you imagine a pharmaceutical that lowered cancer rate by 50%? There would be, if it was a vaccine or a drug, it would be a blockbuster. These medicinal mushrooms can have a profound anti-cancer effect, but they're not patentable, so that you just have to incorporate them in your diet to see the benefits. In my area, there are black locust trees, honey locust trees that they get a shelf mushroom that's called the crack cat polypore. And there were studies done on this that shows it protects the liver, has anti-diabetes effect, helps protect the brain, anti-cancer effects. You can make a tea from this mushroom, the shelf mushroom. It's got a real earthy, strong taste. So this one's just not widely used edibly or medicinally. Cordyceps mushroom is a very interesting fungus. So this is a mushroom that was first found in the highlands of Tibet and Nepal. So the yak herders would take their yaks up to the highland, the valleys, to graze, and the yaks would become very amorous and energetic as they grazed in this area. The yak herders looked and they found this mushroom sticking up out of the ground, and they dig it out, what they found was the mushroom was sprouting from the head of a Tibetan ghost moth caterpillar. So these cordyceps mushrooms parasitize insects. And interestingly, the cordyceps mushroom is increases testosterone and has other immunomodulating properties. So it has a marked effect on libido, helps improve fatigue, has anti-cancer properties, and it's just really very useful for all these aging-related conditions. And so the yak herders did what any good yak herder would do. They gathered these up and sold them to the Chinese at $2,000 an ounce. Fortunately, we can cultivate these on mycelium and get very similar medicinal effects without having to eat the caterpillar or transact with the yak herders. So as we said, the influenza is a tough illness, and there are prescription drugs approved that don't really work very well. One of the major ones had the study, how it got approved, the influenza lasts 7.2 days. And with treatment, with the prescription drug treatment, it takes the symptoms down to like 6.1 days or something like that. And it was a minimal effect, and you have to take it within the first 48 hours of the onset of the illness to have any effect. And there's studies showing that there's a lot of different studies showing the anti-influenza effects of various mushrooms. And these effects can be synergistic when you combine various mushroom species. And there are about 14 different mushroom species that have been studied and have anti-influenza effects. Some of the ones that are more commonly used medicinally include the cordyceps, maitake, reishi, turkey tail. Shiitake is an edible mushroom. I don't have any photos of it, but it is. It also has medicinal properties, particularly against influenza. So when you combine these mushrooms in a formulation and take them all together, they can have very profound effects. So I started doing this when it was several years ago. I came down with the flu, and I had pre-made a tea with various mushroom species. And fortunately, I came down with the flu, so I drank a bunch of this mushroom tea. I went to bed the next day, I was all better. So I thought, well, there's something to this. So I started using similar blends with friends and family as they would come down with the flu, and we saw similar effects. Usually within about 2 days, there was a marked improvement of symptoms. So this is something I started incorporating in practice during the flu seasons, and it's been very helpful. People see a profound and very quick benefit from using this combination of medicinal mushrooms. And as we always say, more mushrooms are always better. So we always try to combine as many mushrooms as we can. The giant puffball is an interesting mushroom that it has its own set of anti-cancer properties, particularly against sarcomas. And you can find these in the fall in Indiana. So I'll stop the screen share here, and we can chat a little bit about mushrooms.
Trent, that's amazing. I didn't realize there were so many. When you first introduced me to the medicinal mushrooms, being the science guy, right? I'm like, but how does it do that? And then I realized that these are foods, okay? And a food is never one thing. A drug oftentimes is just one thing, and you can measure the effect. And most randomized clinical trials always focus on one indication and one molecule. But obviously, symbiosis, the synergy between different compounds, has profound effects. That's why food's so important, not just like a monosupplement, with few exceptions. But, just a simple thing, the concept of factorial. If you have 31 different compounds in a mushroom, there's 110 million combinations upon which they can act, So it's like, there's no way you're going to titrate down and say, cordyceps raises XYZ because of this. Maybe you can at some point, but they're much more complex than that. Would you agree? First of all, you used to. I have Dr. Austin mushrooms in my supplement supply. Are you still selling medicinal mushrooms?
We provide supplements for my patients in my practice, and I'm always happy to do a one-on-one consultation with patients in my natural medicine practice to discuss the pros and cons, risk and benefits of these type of supplements. So that's something I'd be happy to help patients out with on a case-by-case basis. But yeah, the oyster mushrooms were something that many of these supplements are available and you can find them online. Oyster mushrooms were something that I struggled to find in a capsule form. So I initially put that. I tried to have patients go find mushrooms elsewhere. They didn't do it. I started selling dried bags of mushrooms in the practice, and I would ask people a month later how they work. They said, well, they're still sitting on the shelf. So people want the convenience of typically a supplement that's in a capsule form. They don't want to fool around with making teas and think obstacles for getting it. So I felt strongly that the oyster mushrooms can be very beneficial for the conditions we discussed, and I wanted to make those available for my patients. So I did work to make those available for my patients.
Now, I know that there was one mixture from Aloha Medicinals, Immunosys Critical Care. Are you still using that in your practice?
Yeah, so that particular mixture is something that has a lot of those anti-influenza compounds. So that's a good one. There's the Stamets 7 Host Defense is another product that has, I think, 7 different medicinal mushrooms that are synergistic, many of which have those anti-influenza properties. The medicinal mushrooms have very profound antiviral properties, but also immunomodulating properties, and they can be beneficial. I think that's their usages in these conditions that Western medicine does not have a good answer for.
Right. The biggest problem I face on a regular basis, and it's true in my own children, is severe allergies, mainly related to gut dysbiosis. What would be your recommended mushroom or blend for gut health?
Well, what I use mainly is the reishi because of the mouse study showing how it alters gut microflora in a beneficial way and lowers gut inflammation in that mouse study. And I've seen that replicated in the human population. It works in many cases very well for irritable bowel syndrome. And I use it as part of a protocol along with trying to alter the diet, incorporate fermented foods. Sometimes we do a couple months of a probiotic supplement. So these things can be very beneficial. There's a food called tiger nuts I often recommend for people, particularly if they're having constipation. And it's not a nut, it's an underground tuber that has been shown also to alter the gut microflora. And it's a prebiotic. So, people know about probiotics, but there's prebiotics that give a good home, make your gut a good home for these beneficial bacteria. So the reishi can do that, and certain foods that have fiber, particularly things like tiger nuts.
What about people that want to go out in the woods and find mushrooms and experiment with them? How do they differentiate between a safe variety and a poisonous variety, other than having a field guide?
Yeah, well, a field guide, there's various field guides that are available. I would recommend a YouTube channel called Learn Your Land by Adam Harrington. He does an excellent job on just beautiful videos going out and showing various edible plants, but also mushrooms. And he has a mushroom course that you can pay a small fee and take this mushroom course. I would highly recommend that. Everything he does is top notch. So I think that's a good thing. And there's no substitute for going out with an experienced mushroom hunter to learn the various species. Because if you try to, the field guides that have drawings, those are really useless. The photos are helpful, but seeing it in person is very helpful. But I would advise people to exercise caution. So they're all mushrooms are edible, but some only one time. So you have to be careful out there, and when in doubt, throw it out. You don't want to be risking your life. There are poisonous mushrooms out there. So this is not a mushroom identification presentation. This is the introduction to stimulate interest and help expose people to other resources.
Now, since we're talking about things that are maybe a little bit on the dark side when it comes to mushrooms, someone asked about the beneficial effects of microdosing with psychedelic mushrooms for healing from trauma and things of that nature.
Yeah, so psilocybin mushrooms have a long history of use in Native Americans and also other cultures. And there are emerging studies after a long hiatus where the government quashed all studies on psychedelics. There's an emerging body of evidence showing the benefit of psilocybin mushrooms, whether it be in less frequent, larger dosing or very small microdosing in treating refractory depression, cluster headaches, migraine headaches, and other medical conditions, PTSD in particular. But it's complicated by the fact that they are not legal in many areas unless you're using it as part of a approved study or as part of your sincere and bona fide religious practices. An interesting anecdote there, the psilocybin mushrooms were really unknown in the Western world for some reason up until 1959. 1959, there was an article written in Life magazine by Gordon Wasson, and he worked with another gentleman, Stephen Borghehi, on tracing the evidence of the Mesoamerican mushroom cults. And Stephen Borghehi was killed in a mysterious car accident, but Gordon Wasson traveled down to Mesoamerica, Guatemala, and Mexico, and eventually was able to get in contact with Maria Sabina, who was a curandera. She was a person who would cure people in her village, and she was held in high esteem. She was very poor, but as everybody was there, but she was the mayor described her as a woman without blemish, and people would come to her who needed healing, and she would do a mushroom velada in which she would take the psilocybin mushrooms and wave them through copal incense. They would rub their forearms with San Pedro tobacco, and they would all take the mushrooms, and she would get visions of what curing, how to cure this particular patient. And she had case after case of miraculous cures. She cured her uncle. She cured, I believe it was her sister. And for instance, her uncle was dying and had seen other people and didn't get he was still not doing well. And during the mushroom velada for him, she got a vision of a plant that was growing under a waterfall and a couple miles away. So she walked up the road the next morning to this waterfall, found this plant, brought it back, and gave it to the uncle who was then cured. And so Gordon Wasson went down and did a mushroom velada with Maria Sabina, and came back and wrote about Life magazine, and it stimulated a lot of interest, and particularly interest by the CIA. So his next visit down there, he had a new friend who was a CIA agent, and they brought samples back and were able to synthesize psilocybin. They very quickly made it illegal for everybody else to use, but the CIA started using it as part of a project called MK Ultra, which was a very dark mind control and other research. And this went on for decades, and they denied the existence of this project, but and that was not all they were doing, but eventually it was found out, and supposedly it's shut down, but I don't know whether it is or not.
Right. Now, just someone asked about COVID, and Dr. Austin's going to come back in a bit, not in a month or two, and talk about his work in COVID. But do you have any experience with COVID and your medicinal mushrooms?
I always have a preference for natural options, and I do believe the medicinal mushrooms can help with immunomodulation. But I've had better experience with the prescription drugs for early outpatient COVID treatment. And but I did find a so we talked earlier about the fire sponge mushroom, willow bracket mushroom, for its effect at anti-influenza and neurodegenerative disease, particularly multiple sclerosis, and the mouse study. So that mouse study, if you read that mouse study, that mushroom extract inhibited the infiltration of the inflammatory immune cells into the central nervous system in the mice that had the multiple sclerosis model. So I had a patient who had COVID, and they were sick for a couple of weeks, and they were able to come back to work. And then a few months later, developed a very severe headache, where to the point where if they tried to sit up or stand up, they had such excruciating headache that they couldn't. And it was disabling for that person. And within and they were down for a couple months. And they did MRIs, and finally they saw, again, all the King's horses, all the King's men. The lumbar puncture was negative, but the MRI showed brain swelling. So this person had a meningoencephalitis that appeared to be viral in nature, but they were unable to detect the virus. And what I believe this was a post-COVID meningoencephalitis. The COVID, it causes brain inflammation. You see this in the acute phase, but you can see it less commonly in a delayed reaction. So this person they were out of it. They couldn't sit up, they couldn't stand up. So I suggested, again, I like to practice medicine, and I like to help people. And I suggested this person use the fire sponge mushroom powder, and very quickly the headaches were gone, and the person was able to resume working within a few short weeks. So that's, and we often see, particularly I saw it with the Omicron and other COVID variants, but particularly the Omicron, people get with COVID, it comes on with a very severe headache. And I believe that this is an acute brain inflammation of the meninges. And I recommended consideration of the fire sponge mushroom for its effect on inhibiting that neural inflammation. The other thing we see with COVID is in the acute phase, you get the cytokine storm. But one thing you see in particular is a marked increase in interleukin 6, and this fire sponge mushroom will lower interleukin 6. So these are the kind of things that I think they are worthy of further study. But we don't have a lot of time for study. We were in the middle of a federally declared national health emergency in a mass casualty situation. And, I think it's appropriate to try things to help people. And I think this is one of the things that is worthy of further exploration.
A couple questions on sourcing. Number one, can we grow mushrooms in our backyard? Like we can, have a patio tomato or something of that nature?
The answer is yes, if you have the right kind of backyard. So I'm growing reishi, oyster, lion's mane, shiitake, but there's techniques to do that. And typically a lot of these mushrooms grow on wood, so you can inoculate wood you can drill holes and put little. You can buy pre-made spawn plugs and shove them in the holes and cover them with wax. But then you have to put them in the right environment. So like my shiitake logs are on a north-facing slope with some layers of vegetation to help lock in the microclimate. And because the mushrooms, they don't like to dry out. They want to be in a moist, semi-shaded environment. So yes, these things, and you can buy if you're an unfortunate person who has to live in the city. You can buy boxes that will fruit various types of mushrooms on your kitchen counter or wherever you want to do it. So that's a fun little project with the kids, and you can look online for those kind of things. So that's fun. I saw somebody ask a question regarding Lyme disease. So Lyme disease is tough, and but I had a patient come in one time who was debilitated. He had the vague symptoms of, fatigue, brain fog, numbness and tingling, joint pain, And a lot of my patients have that fatigue and brain fog. Those are non-specific symptoms. I didn't know what he had off the bat, but I drew some lab work and planned to see him back in a month. And I begin empiric treatment while I'm waiting on these lab test results to come back. So I put him on a mix of medicinal mushrooms that was, Cordyceps. It was the Immunisys product: turkey tail, Cordyceps, maitake, shiitake. I put him on lion's mane, and I saw him back in a month, and all his symptoms were markedly improved. Brain fog was 90% improved. Joint pain was gone. Fatigue was markedly improved. And his lab test showed Lyme disease. I wasn't treating him for Lyme disease. I was just treating him. And so we ended up putting him on antibiotics and teasel root and things like that. And to try to treat. But that's been my experience with that. Just a medicinal mushroom extract for Lyme disease, we saw a marked improvement in his symptoms. So I'm not saying that's a standalone treatment. It's Lyme disease is a tough thing to eradicate. If you don't get on it right away, it can persist for a very long time.
What you showed me, Dr. Austin, when we were working in that organization, and you obviously got to talk to my mentor, Dr. Trent, but you carry it to a whole different level of doing very complementary immune modulating things with the mushrooms and other things. So I think that's a critical part. I'm writing this book called Health, Freedom, Loss, and I just explained, the yin and yang of Claude Bernard and Louis Pasteur. Louis Pasteur, germ theory; Claude Bernard, internal terrain. And if you don't work on the internal terrain, forget about treating the germs, because they're going to be refractory if they're not healthy. And so that's a big part of it. What about chaga? Did I pronounce it right? Chaga mushrooms?
Yeah, and that's one I didn't have in my presentation, but it is one that I like. Now there's wild. So chaga it's an interesting mushroom because it grows on the side of trees, but it's not a shelf kind of mushroom. It's more amorphous. It grows on birch, and it has betulinic acid. It's got a long history of medicinal use in Siberia and Alaska. Studies suggest it has anti-cancer properties, may potentially be helpful for vitiligo. I know of a gentleman who had rheumatoid arthritis, and he used tinctures of reishi and chaga and kept his joint pain and rheumatoid arthritis symptoms under control with just that mixture. So it's a good medicinal mushroom, and it's a very tasty tea to make also.
Well, Michelle asked that question, and she also talked about the danger of taking these things. And I think the idea is that fungi are some of the. There was a Netflix on fungi recently, and they're a completely different species than, say, insects and and mammals and all. I mean, I'm not an expert on phylum, but I think really if you want to embrace a mushroom treatment program, working with Dr. Austin is probably a must, because he's not a rookie. He's internal medicine, and those are probably some of the most well-trained physicians in the standard of care. And then he's branched out into this area, and he's worked with me and Dr. Carter. So you're talking about someone that's extremely well-rounded, and I think it would make sense to get some help there. Your email that people can contact you, because you had your slide up at the very end, but it was only up briefly. What is the best way to contact you, Dr. Austin?
Yeah, so I could do a quick screen share and see if we can get that.
I'll write it down in the chat, because most people are following the chat.
We have a website, acudocurgentcare.com. So like I said, I own and operate urgent care centers, but I also have a natural medicine practice, and we have several of our providers who are trained and are on board with this type of protocol. So it can be me or my other practitioners. So I'm going to do a quick screen share here with the contact information.
Are you going across borders now, or is that a problem still?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm licensed in Indiana, Ohio, and it'd probably be best to stick to that for the time being. And there were initially during COVID, there were some waivers that allowed us to do cross-state practicing, and there's some states it's a confusing morass and web of regulations. So I'm trying to stay out of trouble as best I can. So I think
I was told by a doctor in Nashville,
yeah.
as long as someone comes and visits you in person within a year, then you can work with them remotely. I don't know if you've looked into that or not, but that's what I'm hearing.
Oh, so he's saying that you can do a telemedicine visit with the expectation that they come visit you within a year, and then you're good, and it's out of your control whether they show up or not. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you can't go beyond it. You can't go beyond a year.
Oh,
that's what I'm told, and I can put you in touch with that gentleman.
I would love that. Yes, I would love to clarify that, because we have seen the need during COVID to help people, and in many cases, people were, people with COVID were just being told to go home till their lips turn blue. But we've found that there's evidence that early outpatient treatment can be very beneficial for COVID. And what we see with COVID is there's an initial viral replication phase of like 4 to 7 days, and a lot of people get better. But some people, right around day 7, day 8, have a very sudden onset of shortness of breath and feeling like they can't take a deep breath, a very severe cough. And we found some information from a doctor in South Africa, Dr. Shankar Shetty, who was he had the realization this looks like a type 1 hypersensitivity allergic reaction in the lungs. Let's try to treat it that way. So, he's willing to practice medicine and be bold. So he used a protocol with very high dose steroid, antihistamine, H2 blocker, and a mast cell stabilizer, and saw fantastic results. He says he treated 9,000 patients, 0 deaths, 0 hospitalizations. And we had been treating COVID. We do, I believe that there's benefits to hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, and there's, I don't know if you saw one of the studies they funded on ivermectin that showed it didn't work, but they if you delve into the details of the study, they gave the ivermectin on an empty stomach. That's great if you're trying to treat intestinal worms, but if you want to treat COVID, you need to absorb it. You have to give it with fatty food. And they knew that, and they designed a study to show that it fails, because all you see is the headlines. All the lay people see are the headlines that show, the ivermectin study didn't work. But I think there's benefit there. But we even with ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, we saw some people who right around day 7 would take a turn for the worse, and we would use steroids, and that helped some of those people too. But this protocol we implemented in January of this last peak, the Omicron peak, and that's what we saw is that with that protocol, if you implement that when they come in on day 7, day 8, when they start feeling short of breath, within 3 days they're better. And I wish we'd have known that at the beginning of the pandemic, but everybody was trying to learn about this new virus and so forth. But it's something that I plan to treat patients further with that protocol in the next wave. And I believe there will be a next wave, probably in the fall or winter of this year in the U.S.
Trent, let me ask you another question. Well, first of all, my dear friend, personal attorney and legal consultant, Dolores, says, as an attorney, I can tell you that if you see a specialist anywhere in the country, yes, you can follow up to 1 year with that patient if you're an MD. So I'll get you some more information on this. But I have another question. Can you do like non-medical consults on medicinal mushrooms without treating a disease? Is there a way to avoid coming into the sort of a medical purview of crossing boundaries? Can you be a mushroom consultant?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it would be trying to find loopholes. I'm not about finding loopholes. I want to do things, the way I'm trying to stay out of trouble. Tom, don't get me in trouble.
No, I'm trying not to get you into trouble because you've been a valuable resource to me. I can tell you that much. So, I see that Dr. Harshfield unmuted himself. Dr. Austin, I'll have you take that screen down and just come back on full screen again.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Okay. All right.
And Dr. Hartsfield, do you have a comment?
Well, yeah, sort of. And I got a question for Dr. Austin. Thank you so much for doing this. You're
No problem.
awesome. We have worked with a lot of the folks that are thinking that these retroviruses like RNA viruses like COVID are a vast endotheliopathy. They attack the endothelial lining of the capillaries.
Right.
Okay. If mushroom, and by the way, one of the ways to restore that is with fucoidin, which is a seaweed compound that we get from a company in Utah. And I'm thinking about mushrooms and the fact that, and I'm not going to say this again, Thomas, because I got a bad reaction the first time I said it, but they were here a long time before most of us were pond scum. We were like single-cell organisms in 2 dimensions. And fungi became 3-dimensional. They understood verticality and so forth. And the show that Thomas was talking about, we talked about the fungi, and it said at the very end of it was a very spooky female voice that said, "Fungi, we were here before you got here. We're just looking for a partner. If you want to be that, great. But if not, we'll just absorb you." And I went, wow. But we have a certain amount in our gut of bacteria and viruses, but fungi are very important. Do you think that these mushrooms are not so much antimicrobial as much as restorative of the immune system? Because we've got some of these little guys that live within us.
Well, yeah, they are immunobalancing. So it's interesting that, like for example, the reishi mushroom, if you have irritable bowel syndrome with diarrhea or irritable bowel syndrome with constipation, it fixes both of those. And yeah, so they're fantastic, and it's an overlay. I mean, it's a whole new kingdom. We're used to doing, there's plants, there's animals, and then there's mushrooms. These things can be restorative, and that's, as an example, the reishi can be, the cordyceps can be, and Dr. Lewis, a lot of the how do they work? Well, maybe a lot of these diseases are due to a mushroom deficiency.
Exactly, Trent. You're right on the money. Well, it's a nutrient. It's a deficiency. There's no question about it. And medicinal mushrooms provide a lot of different phytonutrients, a lot of which that we're neglecting. I mean, Americans are so fussy in their diet. I talk about something as simple as liver. People turn their nose up. I look at the USDA about their discussion about seafood, and they completely ignore sea vegetables. And the ocean covers 70% of the surface of the earth. And so sea vegetables aren't a thing. We've got to learn as Americans to be more Japanese, be more French. We need to diversify our diets. And then I guess the medicinal mushrooms, my story always goes back to Dr. Trent, my mentor. There was a Chinese gentleman in seeing him. He was really interested in Dr. Trent's work on the connection between the eye and the brain. And I was talking to the gentleman like 15 years ago, and he mentioned a medicinal mushroom, and Dr. Trent ushered him into his office, and he had 2 thick leather-bound volumes on Chinese herbs and mushrooms. Mm-hmm. I have to understand these things because they're powerful. They're powerful drugs in a way, natural drugs, and I need to make sure I'm not prescribing something that might interact with them.
Yeah.
So I mean, they're not just a piece of lettuce. Let's put it that way. There's substances in them that go far beyond the kind of like the average run-of-the-mill diet that most Americans have. And so I think it's really important to incorporate them in. And I'm in a grocery store desert, so I have a hard time getting good mushrooms. I try to eat mushrooms at least 2 or 3 times a week, and that's not enough.
Yeah, the edible mushrooms, you can. They're very safe when you cook them. The ones that are sold in grocery stores, and if you know what you're doing, the wild harvested mushrooms. For the medicinal mushrooms, my rule of thumb for dosage is 3 dried grams. So oyster mushrooms, that's what the study was done on. Reishi mushroom, 3 grams. The immune, if I'm treating influenza or an acute illness with a mix of mushrooms, I'm going to go for 3 grams twice a day. But generally, most of these mushrooms are 3 dry grams, with some variance there.
Right. We look at it as a supplement, but it's really a food. And so we look at it, and I remember a lot of people taking the immunosys critical care would say, I have to take 6 a day. It's, well, pour it out and compare it to one white mushroom. And it's a small mass compared to that. So yeah, you have to do it a day. Otherwise, find these mushrooms and eat them.
Right. So I have a patient who has diabetes and hypertension, and he'll take the oyster mushroom capsules when he's traveling, but he gets more of a benefit when he eats a handful of the oyster mushrooms chopped up, sauteed with garlic and olive oil.
Absolutely.
So if you got some of these medicinal edible mushrooms, you can ramp up the dosing by incorporating them into your diet rather than taking a handful of capsules.
I need to have Andrew come on because I missed him the last couple times. He's my hockey buddy from Canuck from Vancouver, eh? And
that's right. Well, it's funny enough you say that too. By the way, the movie that you're talking about, it's called Fantastic Fungi, and it is a really well done documentary. And I think most of it is actually shot here in BC, which is where I live. And there's a lot about the microbiome, I think, that we don't understand. Perhaps there's even more species of fungi than there is bacteria. But I was going to ask if Dr. Austin, if you, anecdotally, or maybe just clinically, do you think you see or notice a bigger difference with the powder, the botanicals, or like what you just mentioned, the sauteed actual food form, which I always say food is probably best unless you're getting a way higher dose with something like a botanical. Maybe I missed this part. You might have already covered it, but
yeah. So the oyster mushrooms, I think, are potentially more beneficial in an edible form. Cooked and sauteed, they don't really lose their medicinal properties when they're cooked. That being said, a lot of people, they don't want to change their eating habits, so they're seeking the convenience of a capsule. So that's what I end up using in the practice mostly.
Right. Yep. Yeah, it makes sense. The best option is the one that they do, right?
Right.
Dr. Austin, could you share your source? You mentioned a couple company names earlier, and I didn't get them for the capsules.
Yeah, so 2 of the biggest companies that supply medicinal mushrooms, there's Aloha Medicinals out of Carson City, Nevada, and then there's Host Defense Fungi Perfecti out of the state of Washington. And I think the Aloha Medicinals had the claim of the largest indoor cultivator of medicinal mushrooms in the world for a very long time. I don't know if they still are or not.
Thank you.
Obviously, we're not schoolboy football.
Okay. We had a brief interlude there. But anyway, Andrew, we didn't get to see your face. Dr. Austin, this was fantastic.
Yeah.
And I know where the topic is sort of out there compared to many other topics. It shouldn't be, but it is. I mean, fungi. Look, I just I had a bag of oranges that didn't make it in the refrigerator for some reason. There was this puffball of green.
Yeah. Don't eat that one.
No, I didn't eat that one. I rinsed the rest of them in bleach just to be careful. But I know you raised more questions than even you answered, and you answered a lot. But I just think it's a provocative topic, and I think probably a lot of people would enjoy having you back on this topic. And I've already got great comments, and then on COVID or any other topic as we move forward. So it's excellent. And I'll try to get you some information on the cross-border thing. Obviously, I don't want to get you in trouble, but I think if nothing else, we can do more webinars and people can learn about these because
yes, I'd like to help as many people as I can, particularly during this next COVID wave, because that's what we ran into. The last COVID waves is we had people who were looking to be treated, and we didn't feel comfortable doing it across state lines. But if there's a way we can legally do that, I'd be happy to do that. I don't like turning people away. Unfortunately, we live in a very litigious society, and when you start to do things that, if you do things right, you're going to be persecuted. So there's always somebody out there.
Yeah.
Who,
investigated us, Dr. Austin.
If they're going to, if they love it, these physicians, if they are going to acknowledge that what we're doing is right, they have to acknowledge that what they've been doing wrong, what they've been doing for decades is wrong. And that's a hard thing for them to come to. It's easier for them to try to find some little area where I did something wrong and then persecute me. So
it's hard to go 60 years and just say, oops, just kidding. They can't.
Yeah.
You know what would be really good, Thomas, is if Dr. Austin could do case presentations, like maybe have a patient with headaches or maybe a patient with fibromyalgia and how you treated them. I think that'd be really interesting.
Yeah, some case studies would be great.
Mm-hmm.
So, and with that, I have one final comment. Andrew, my Canadian, I just finished my cholesterol chapter. And I say, Canadians beware, the Canadian Consensus Working Group, when, Dr. Austin talking about they're stuck in the syndrome. So the Canadian Consensus Working Group has updated its evaluation of the literature pertaining to statin intolerance and adverse effects. They concluded cognitive consideration should not alter the decision to prescribe statins if indicated for management of lipids or cardiovascular risk. So watch out, you Canadians, and the brains thereof.
Wow.
I've been waiting for you, Andrew, to tell you that. And with that, Dr. Austin, thanks so much. And we did record this, and I'll try to get this published as soon as I can.
Thank you so much for having me. I love to talk about mushrooms. I can talk for hours.
Thank you.
I'd be happy to come back.
We didn't ask them about the magic mushrooms. We'll save that for maybe another time.
They did ask me about it. So.
Oh, they did. Okay.
They did. Thank you.
Recording.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Dr. Austin.
That's great info.
Thank you, doctor.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
very much.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Just inside your gate. Wake up America.